Hello, and welcome to this episode of Foodlands. I'm Theo Simmons from Profits, Wizards and the Quest to Value Nature. This is a special episode of the season kindly hosted by the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis. Last episode, you'll remember we heard from Mark Maslin at the geospatial AI company Resotech and biodiversity engineer Yuri Martin from the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology. They both talked about how important data is becoming within agriculture. And in this episode, we get into even more detail about what the data revolution means for creating a life-supporting sustainable food system. Other species in the biosphere can see different wavelengths of light. They can see magnetic fields. They have information on our interconnections with nature that we just don't possess. That's changing for us humans. Alexandra is joined by Steffen, Fritz and Juan Laso, Bayas, researchers in the Novel Data Ecosystems Group of the Advancing Systems Analysis Program at IIASA, and Tamme van der Waal, information management expert with a special interest in the data revolution at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and a commercial manager at Akkerweb. It's a seriously interesting episode. In a way, many farmers in the global north are where we all were with Facebook back in the early 2000s. We didn't yet know the value of our own data. We really hope you enjoy the episode, and huge thanks to Ivelena Georgieva and Gerrit Hager at IIASA for convening this great discussion.
All right. So it's a great pleasure to be with the three of you here on the podcast. Welcome to all three of you, Tamme, Juan Carlos, and Steffen. It's great. We're going to be talking about whether technology and technological innovation can help us both feed the world and reduce biodiversity loss due to better land management practices. And it's a far and wide topic. So thankfully, there are three of you. And hopefully we'll do our best to bring these issues down on the ground to pragmatically which tools are being developed. So as we like to just begin on this podcast, I'll invite each one of you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do and why you do it. Do you want to get us started, Tamme?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Alexandra. My name is Tamme van der Waal. I have actually two jobs. I work at Wageningen Research as a scientist working on digital solutions. And the other part of my working life, I'm running a company that is selling spatial data, satellite data to farmers. So I'm both with my feet in the mud, so to say, and looking from the ivory tower towards it. My main occupation there is to see how we can use technology and particularly data and digital technologies to reshuffle the balance between economic benefit and ecological pressures. Because I think with the technology we can do a lot in helping farmers to be still economically viable, but have better care for soil, environment, climate, etc. So that's what I do.
Thank you so much. Juan Carlos, do you want to take over?
Sure. My name is Juan Carlos Laso, and I am a research scholar at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. I work mostly with citizen science, and I've been, mostly focusing on statistics, though lately we've been working with projects that deal with technology that can help farmers. So I'm by formation an agronomist, but now I try to put all these citizen science and crowdsourcing into helping farmers through technology. So that's what I do.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Steffen.
Yes, hello. Thanks, Alexandra. My name is Steffen Fritz. I'm from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis as Juan Carlos, and I'm currently Program Director of the Strategic Initiatives Program. And I've previously done a bit of work with respect to data analysis. My background is geography. And we've been doing quite a bit of work also on global analysis, citizen science and Earth observation, but also looking at indirect land use changes. And I think that plays also quite an important role in this topic, how to feed the world. So I think we've done some relevant research in this field to tackle some of the questions you want to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, before we zoom in on European agriculture and the European food lands, as we call them here on the podcast, the three of you are working on issues that touch upon global agri-food systems and that reflect on how we will feed the growing population of the world without harming the earth systems that literally underlie this capacity to feed everyone and to make sure that it's sustainable in the most literal sense. So, Steffen, do you want to begin by telling us a little bit more about the demographic pressures that lie ahead for our food systems and a hint of how we're going to begin to face those?
Yeah, I mean, just maybe to zoom out again on the global level. So if you look globally, what has happened in the last 20, 30 years, we have drastically deforested many areas, in particular tropical forests. There has been a very high rate of tropical deforestation. And this only happened due to the pressure we have on land and due to the growing population we have to feed, due to the increase also in meat consumption in a lot of emerging economies, for example, China, but also India and so forth. And if you look at all that pressure on land, we have one very obvious thing to do, which some people are not really aware of, is to really try to use some of the yield gaps we have globally. So whereas in Europe, for example, we produce around 8 tons per hectare of maize grain, right? Roughly 7.8, I think, is the average in Europe. But the average in Africa is only 2 tons per hectare. So we have a massive yield gap. So if we can close that yield gap in Africa by putting more inputs, in Africa we don't put enough fertilizer. In Europe, we put too much. So this is really the challenge. But if we did that, we could really free up a lot of land, and we could automatically, just by doing that, save a lot of biodiversity. This is, I think, an important point to be made here. Thanks.
Tamme, because this is such a vast question, I want to give you the opportunity to react. Same for you, Juan Carlos, if you'd like to step in.
Yes, I would definitely like to add to that. I fully agree with Steffen. If we can bring the best agricultural practices to the best places to do it, we could use less land to create a higher production and indeed create enough food for the growing population. However, this has been a debate in the past years because many people see intensification as damaging to environment and biodiversity and ecological values. But indeed, it's the more regional global perspective that should be taken into account. If you can focus it on small areas, you still need to do it on a sustainable way there. You still need to do it on a sustainable way there. But you can definitely indeed save a lot of forest or other nature areas that are now inadequately used.
Just very quick reaction on that. I do fully agree with what Tamme said, and I'm not promoting here massive fertilizers in Africa, but no. At the same time, I think it's this little bit additional input which could help, and this I think is called microdosing. So rather than overdoing it, as we've been doing it a lot in Europe, a little bit of additional, so this can also be organic fertilizer, and good practices of soil management in Africa could really already, organic agriculture has also been shown to be quite successful, can increase yield as well. Just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Perhaps one thing I might add, if I may, is that there's usually this underestimation of how much area or how much contribution to the food system is given by small farmers. So I think these slight additions or these slight improvements to the management done in this area that can be channeled to small farmers, considering their circumstances, their income, the level of technology they can access, can do a huge difference on that. So that's another thing I wanted to mention there.
And I feel like most of the rest of our talk is not only going to be about the innovations that are coming up, but how do we communicate and disseminate these new ideas that are going to allow increased yields on the same land. But it sounds to me like you guys are falling pretty straight on this land sharing versus land sparing debate. And what I'm hearing is an ideal intensification on small areas in order to be able to protect forests on a global scale. And whenever people lean towards this kind of vision of the future, I think it shifts also the debate on energy intensivity, right? And how much intense energy you would need to produce these fertilizers. Perhaps this is why they're still being demonized a little bit. Can you react to this kind of critique of fertilizers as being energy intensive?
Steffen, go ahead.
Well, I don't really have. This is a really tricky question you're posing there. I mean, of course, producing fertilizer is indeed, in general, quite energy intensive, especially the industrial fertilizers like nitrogen. But as I have already said, that there are many other ways. Also, you can have organic ways of fertilizing, and also especially in Africa. Coming back to Africa, you have many times these mixed systems, or you have these livestock mixed systems where there will always be certain animals, goats and cows, many times cattle around. And you can make use of that as a first thing. And then you can do also a lot of things in terms of soil management, where you put some of the initial harvest, straw and so forth, back into the soil. So that itself is, can be done without producing industrial fertilizer. There's a lot of things which can be done without that. But I wouldn't be completely against it. I mean, it is true that it is energy intensive, but at the same time, if you can increase yield to some degree in some areas using this microdosing approach, maybe then the overall gain you're getting out of it, the overall energy gain you will get out of the yield in the end is higher than the input you produce. But there are also efficiency gains which can be made through technological improvements, and this needs to be further examined.
Just to start with the fertilizer issue, what we see is that we use fertilizer indeed to increase crop yields, which is very necessary, but it has become a kind of golden solution to everything. So whatever is wrong with a soil or a parcel, we add fertilizer to it, and the crop picks up what is needed, but the rest, the surplus, is draining or emitting to the environment. And I think the big trick is, can we use technology to advise farmers on the exact amounts of fertilizer that is needed for the crop, but that will not influence the environment. And to come towards this carbon farming thing, it's not just about the fertilizer itself, it's also about the organic matter in the soil. What we see is that a lot of agricultural areas have reduced the organic matter due to intensive practices, and therefore are prone to all kinds of risks with these soils. The risk for drought but also for waterlogging, but also risks on nutrient leaching directly to the groundwater or deeper soils, rather than staying in this fertile root zone where it can be taken up by the crop, maybe even at a later stage. So this whole carbon farming thing, where you are looking at how to increase the carbon stock in the soil, basically by increasing organic matter, is actually an excellent way of also reducing risks on nutrient deficits or water deficits. And therefore, it's like a win-win. And in a more holistic way, we call this regenerative farming, where as a farmer, you're not just looking at your soil as a substrate to grow your crop, but you look at it as a piece of capital that you invest in and that will give you returns on investment. And in the long run, you would like the capital to grow and not to go down. And I think that is the whole essence of regenerative agriculture, and that makes a lot of sense, even in intensive cropping areas. And this carbon farming debate or the carbon farming solution could definitely help to that a lot.
Plus, there might be some ways apart from fertilizer, right? Like there's so many losses on insect damage or storage that these kind of solutions that you can suggest to farmers can actually reduce lots of those. So that's another important point, that we can transmit potential practical solutions that might be accessible, that can be easily taken up, but maybe they're not known.
I'd just like to go home with these ideas, right? Because yesterday the new CAP was brought forward before the MEPs, and so starting in 2023 onwards, there's going to be a new common agricultural policy in the EU. And I'm just wondering how much it will address this need to innovate, and whether you think it's going to give sufficient incentive for the regenerative change that we need in our landscape. Steffen, would you like to lead the way?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is indeed an important question. So I can't really tell you if it's enough. For sure, the Commission has taken some measures now to improve things around biodiversity and regenerative agriculture. So there are for sure new incentives now in place. And what has drastically changed, and what is really a step change, is that I think for the first time there is this disconnect now in the common agricultural policy between subsidies and production. So production is not food first anymore, and many other factors are now equally considered. And that is, fair income, competitiveness is only one of them. Food value chains, or also understanding that the farmer is part of the value chain and needs to be sufficiently compensated, the income of the farmers relative to the others, to the manufacturers and the retailers, has gone down quite a lot. Then there is climate change, that there are opportunities also, as already Tamme has pointed us to, that farmers can directly get benefits and increase their income by doing climate smart agriculture, as well as doing more for the environment. I think the rule now is that farmers have to set aside and keep for biodiversity as a minimum 3% of their farm, but they can get additional income, beefing this up to 7%. So there are direct payments which can be done to farmers through this new scheme, and this is really a game changer. But also there is a stronger emphasis now on landscape heterogeneity and smaller farms as well, supporting sufficiently the smaller farms Juan has talked about. And of course, this has always been a problem with farming in Europe, the generational renewal, which is so much needed. And then we are also making the link to technology. We're really hoping that there will be more younger farmers taking up farming, and they are also much more open to new innovative technologies, which can play a really increasing role, such as, for example, blockchain, and also that farmers start organizing themselves much more, taking the power in that value chain and claiming more of the gains, and that there is hope for that. And of course, last but not least, there is quite a strong focus now also on food health and animal health. That's, I think, really good news for us. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Are there any ways in which you think, I'm going to stay with you, Steffen, it's not enough? Where would you push forward?
Yeah, it's a tricky question because you see, if you do too much, you get the backlash. And I think it is a step change, and you can only do things gradually. So considering that we can't change everything now from one day to another, even though we do actually need a transformation, maybe this was the compromise which was achieved. So I still think it's a success. But of course, you could, in terms of payments and direct payments, you could increase them, and you could increase, of course, always the proportion which relates directly to biodiversity and to climate. And this could happen maybe in the next CAP. But this is where there are debates going on. Is it really enough? But for sure, we will see changes in the European landscape, or hopefully see changes. Maybe the others have some thoughts around those as well.
Yeah, let's open the floor. Tamme, would you like to add something?
Yeah, sure. I think the European Commission has been trying to make these changes for the past 2 decades, or at least. But this is the first time I think they achieve it and even get good support from the Parliament and the Council, and that has always been difficult. And it is, yes, depending on your point of view, it's never enough or it's too much. But I think it's a clear incentive of, well, first of all, of how society at large would like to support farmers if they comply with the regulations on more sustainable production and climate friendly, etc. And it's a strong message that in this way farmers also play an important role in managing the landscape. It's not just about economic benefits, but it's also about the societal aspect of farming that is now, I think, better valued. And these are of course difficult things because we are living in an economically governed world where especially businesses go for profits, or at least positive balances. But when you do that by using the commons like soil and air and water and all these kind of things, it's always very difficult on how to estimate how much you can do as an enterprise and how much it's for public good. And this balance, I think, is now with these incentives from the CAP is trying to shift a little bit. It's not just farmers are not just economic agents; they are also societal agents taking care of our environment.
And I wonder whether these. Oh, go for it.
No. Sorry, I was just going to say that maybe one crucial thing will be how to communicate these things to farmers, because usually you might have the best potential solutions to that, but if the communication gets lost and it's just thought of as the government putting new potential ways of controlling farmers rather than actually communicating this. So communication to me will be crucial too.
I was just going to ask Juan Carlos if he can maybe give us an idea of ways that there are more horizontal ways of communicating with farmers to give them less this impression of top-down regulation coming in that's not in their favor.
I have the impression that, for example, in this technology plays a good role, because at least in Europe there's this high uptake of different technological solutions. So many of these applications or platforms can actually transmit this in a more transparent manner. To me, usually the problem is that things are not so transparent, and so for the final users or the people that should be taking up this technology, is not clear what will be their benefit or what will be the penalty or the benefit of having this there. So I think transparency will be a very clear thing. That's one thing I could mention.
Yeah. What is also interesting in that sense is that technology can also help farmers or other organizations to change the governance process. So it's not just regulations and laws that being put down on farmers and tell them what to do and how to do it. Farmers are increasingly now aware of the situation with environment, with climate, and with technology they can inverse that governance ideal by saying, well, listen, we are a group of farmers and we produce in a sustainable way or in an ecologically friendly way or animal friendly way, and we are delivering these products to the market for dedicated consumers that are ready to pay an extra maybe for this product, for the products that are produced in this way. And this governance turnaround, I think, is a very interesting thing. And of course, we need to have a kind of governmental control. But you can, as a government, you don't no longer have to put down laws to enforce these kind of things. But farmers and food chains, they can inverse this process by doing it themselves and showing to governments that, listen, we are doing it in the way that you would like to do this.
Steffen, I'll move right on back to you after this. But Tamme, what kind of tools are you referring to when you talk about that upstream communication between farmers and regulatory bodies?
What we see now is that with sensor technologies and all kinds of data platforms, farmers are collecting data not about the production, but also about the production ways. So on the cultivation measures. And these informations are often quite one-on-one translatable in all kinds of standards or schemes that food chains or governments apply. So with these data systems, you can more or less accompany the product by showing what has been done and how it has been created and proving that it's been done in the right way.
Steffen, would you like to add something?
Yeah, maybe just one aspect. I think there are also ongoing discussions that there could be more self-reporting by farmers on how they manage their farms. And if this is really the case, it's not only anymore now controlling the farmers. The European Commission is having their satellites controlling them, but is basically matching what the farmer is kind of self-reporting, but also valuing the farmer more in terms of the ecosystem services the farmer provides to society. So this is now for the first time more internalized. Before it was externalized, so it was production, but the biodiversity aspect, the carbon aspect was completely lost. But this aspect is now reconsidered, and this could give a new push to especially young farmers and technology-averse farmers to really step in. And there are also new technologies such as remote sensing where the farmer can directly benefit. So a simple indicator is the normalized difference vegetation index, NDVI, and you can use that and see, which other farmers might have different practices. How is the neighboring farmer performing? What is he doing? What is he doing better? What is he doing differently? And it's an enabling technology where the farmer can learn more about his own farms and the relationship this has to remotely sense-based indices such as NDVI. He can learn more, but he can then also learn how to interpret this and understand better how other farmers are managing the land. For example, if one farmer practices conservation agriculture, cover crops over the winter, these kind of things can be observed from remote sensing, and that really offers new possibilities. But also another aspect which comes in here is, I think we should touch upon that, it's data sharing, and farmers are not necessarily so much willing initially to share all their data because, again, they have this idea, big brother, the EU is watching me. But if there is a mind shift that there's really also a benefit for them if they share their data with other farmers, you can have this kind of benchmarking, and they can really, work together to improve their practices and to also become even a bigger value for society. I just want to make that point. Thanks.
I was going to ask another question, but do say if you want to backtrack in response. And my cat just came on my lap. Okay. Yeah, I think I was going to ask about, you mentioned technology averse farmers who might still be keen with some of these tools, who might still find them helpful. And I think that at the end of the day, with all this research process that we, sorry, okay, you're going to have to go. Guapo. Okay. I think with all the research process that we did with this podcast, we didn't want it to go that way, but there's really a dissociation that's creating in my mind. On one hand, there is the growing agro-environmental schemes, which are even turning into natural capital, which is like an enhanced incentive payment that's based on the added environmental value that certain farmers can create. And whenever I think about that, I think about those smallhold farmers that may be more connected to the land, who are struggling to put their produce on the market and to really make a living from that, who are going to get really supported by these new schemes. And then on the other hand, the farmers who are going to sustain this challenge of food production and who are going to equip themselves increasingly and who are going to benefit from the more traditional direct payments that are related to the amount of food that's produced, as if farmers are going to become two different jobs. But you guys are all working on technology that is explicitly trying to help farmers address the biodiversity crisis on their land. So I was just, maybe I can just have open reactions to this statement.
Maybe one reaction to this. I think, nowadays we would have never thought, let's say 30 or 20 years ago, we would have never thought that all of us will have this kind of mobile phone in our hand, which is a high-tech technology, but it's affordable. So maybe in the future, even small-scale farmers can use this technology, which might not be even that costly. And I think the more they are open to adopt these new technologies, the easier it will also be for them to be competitive than on the market, but also to get the benefits and the payments they deserve. So there are very simple technologies just based on smartphone, where they can, for example, delineate their area, their land, and through those, it also maybe the payments can be made more direct. So these are some technological solutions which might also be accessible to small-scale farmers, but also there are cheaper sensors which they can use, and they are still of high and sufficient quality. So the way they hopefully will go is to still adopt those technology which is affordable to them.
Tamme, do you want to build on that? Why is the future of biodiversity-sensitive agriculture not low-tech?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer in a straight way. And personally, I believe, and I mentioned that before, is that technology can shift the balance between the ecological aspects of farming and the economical aspects of farming. If you talk about low tech and you refer to maybe not using all kinds of digital technologies, the problem is that we also have a lot of technology, for instance, in the chemical part of agriculture, in fertilizers, crop protection agents. Also in the seeds is a lot of technology involved. So if you want to deploy these kind of technologies without the digital technologies, then I think you more or less summarize what has been happened in the past 20, 30 years, where the first technologies were like not very knowledge intensive technologies. If I buy a seed with a coating that prevents the seed from getting attacked by all kinds of molds or whatever, there is a lot of technology, but it is just the same as a seed that I had before. I just deploy it, but in order to get the best kind of profit out of get production out of that seed, I need fertilizer and I need water. And if I don't have the digital technologies to optimize that in an ecological, economical balance, then you easily go beyond the limits that are sustainable. So it's a very, if you are really low tech, if that's what you're referring to, then there's no harm to the environment. Those farmers, they understand that they have to take care of their crops, of their soils and the environment around it. But you cannot cherry pick one technology out of that and forget about the other ones. So that is a bit of the risk that I see. I fully agree that the big chances or the easy chances are for large farms. So smallholder farms are more difficult to reach with these technologies. But as Steffen says, it takes maybe some time, but we will get there in the end because this technology will get absorbed by also the smallholder farms. Maybe it takes a generation. That could be that the younger generation is more able to use it, but we have to get there. I'm low tech without. I don't really believe in it. Sorry. Yeah.
But it also, we may be talking about low tech in the say, for example, on the field, whereas the communication of these high tech practices, which are very common practices of, for example, conservation agriculture, or practices that just enhance yield in different ways. So the high-tech part is the transmission of the message rather than the actual practice on the ground necessarily.
Sure.
So that might be, for example, that's what we are experiencing with some of the farmers in Mexico, for example, right? We didn't expect them to have all of them many, smartphones, but actually when we met them, most of them have a smartphone, even though they're really in places very hard to reach. And so the problem that we had before was the transmission of all of this. And I think the technology is really helping us to do that.
Just a simple example that I learned on a project that I visited in Ethiopia is that a lot of crop failure there starts by sowing at the wrong date. Basically, they are waiting for the rain and then they start sowing. But you never know if the first drops of rainfall is that the real rain, or is that just a storm in advance of the real rain period. Giving these people a good weather information through mobile phones already reduces the amount of crop failures significantly. Just by saying, next week it's really going to rain. And then they can start sowing and fertilizing, and then the rain comes and the crop will flourish. So if that's what you mean, I fully agree, Juan.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is one of the things. I mean, the high tech will be the transmission, but I meant also like pre-existing agricultural practices, right? Of course, seeding date is a crucial one, and then if that is informed by existing already forecasts on higher technology, which are also high tech, that's good too. Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, just to add to that, I think what is additionally really important in this, so it's the sowing date, but also if you can really make a good drought forecast in these African countries. So if the drought forecasting is also getting better, but that is what matters a lot. To what degree do they, for example, have to use sorghum instead of maize, because sorghum is more drought resistant. So this type of information in terms of their choices is of course also really useful. So indeed, it's the weather forecast and the longer term seasonal drought related forecast, or even flood forecast, which then matters. Thanks.
I was just wondering whether, Juan Carlos, you could take a moment to introduce to us the project that you're working on with the farmers in Mexico, so that we could talk about perhaps some of the opportunities that innovation offers and some of the challenges involved.
Right. So there are two parts. So before we had already a project that was running for a couple of years, and now is a transfer technology to the International Center for Maize and Wheat Improvement in Mexico, CIMIT. With them, we developed together a mobile app, which was essentially focusing on sustainable intensification of agriculture. So that was transmitting to the farmers all of these potential tips and tricks for improving agriculture in small steps. Currently, we have another project that is starting next year, and it will also be in Mexico with a similar platform with AgroTutor. But we will be transmitting strategies through the app that is called on agriculture. How is it? Agriculture based on ecosystems or something like this. Or I'm sorry, I forgot the actual name now. But this is essentially trying to look at the ecosystem where the farmers are, or look at the location which they are, and then suggest the better practices for that location, but transmitting them through this application. And the idea is also that this application has the possibility of sharing all of this weather data, has the possibility of sharing potential yield developed from crop models to the farmers, and also collect back some of this information. So it allows the farmers to enter every management practices that they have done in the application, and that informs back the models that we run for example, crop potential or yield potential or so on, which again goes back to them, right? And then there are other modules that we will try to include there that we had for the app before, like a price forecasting, which is not only focusing on the agricultural part, but telling farmers what will be the potential route that they could take to better sell their crops or the final crop that they collect, right? And all of these, the previous application, the current application, have in common that they are aiming to modify existing practices or tune or fine-tune them. So there is not this spillover to the environment, this extra fertilizer use, this misuse of pesticides and insecticides and so on. All of these things that not only protect the environment and the water table and the water that runs around the farms, but also reduces costs for the farmers, which is an important spin and important thing, especially with small farmers that we work on in Mexico. So in a nutshell, that's more or less what we will be trying to do and we were doing before.
I guess I wanted to begin by looking at what are perhaps some of the technical challenges associated with the development of this tool. And maybe factoring this in, I don't know if it's separate, but what is the appeal for a farmer to use this tool? Are you finding that it's very obvious to come up to a farmer and to put it in place? What are some of the challenges along the way?
Right. I mean, one of the things we realized before, and this we realized through all this crowdsourcing and citizen science campaigns, is that what is this hook, right? In this case, for the farmers, we thought that one of the most important things was to give them actionable information. So something they could act on. Like, for example, this price forecasting was one of the main things that we had here. So you could see that the price of a certain commodity was falling or was rising. And so you could say, okay, I rather store it or rather keep it or rather sell it here or sell it directly to the market, right? If you can. And another thing we had there was a layer of geographically derived information with several locations of where you could sell the products that you produce, or where is the nearest support area from CIMMYT, for example, in the previous project. So something that you can act on, something that can save you money, and something that may enhance your production, and by as a collateral effect, reduce the impact on the biodiversity, right? Because that's not so obvious to see, and that is not a short-term thing for a farmer. It's usually a longer, mid-long term that you can see all the benefit of these practices in restoring your soil, in protecting the biodiversity, in enhancing the habitat for pollinators that might in turn better your production and so on, right? So that's the appeal, something that has to be direct, and later on you can see the indirect effects that are also for your own farm.
And in that specific context, as developers, was it quite obvious the nexus between something that's more cost efficient and economically viable for the farmers and simultaneously that is environmentally regenerative? Was that nexus obvious?
In what sense? So between these two areas of biodiversity enhancement and also reducing of costs? Yeah, I mean, from an agronomist perspective, this was quite obvious, and this is why we were working also with the International Center for Maize and Wheat Improvement, because they had already some experience on some of these varieties or some practices that could reduce the cost, that could already improve the yields. Of course, CIMMYT also has lots of new technology, new varieties for maize or for wheat specifically, and some other crops too. But definitely there are some slight changes on practices that do a lot to improve yields and also to reduce costs, and by default to avoid environmental problems. So yeah, that was a very easy gain. But the difficult part was the communication, and so the tool that we developed was the key to enhance and disseminate this faster and on a larger scale. That's what we're hoping with this new project too, and that's what we're hoping with as the other deployment of this one happens.
I'm going to get a chance to ask Steffen, would you like to react or perhaps introduce another tool that you're finding interesting at the moment?
So I just wanted to also let you know about some tools we have been developing as part of Horizon 2020 project. And this is around giving farmers the opportunity to get access to satellite data. Essentially it's a platform where farmers can see how they manage their fields, so they can draw an area on Google Maps, for example, or other tools, or also aerial photography, and then they can see time series of satellite data in order to understand how the management of their fields relates to these satellite-related indices. And they can also get aggregate statistics. They can also see how their performance and how their management compares to that of other farmers. And they can also get a more wider kind of overview on how satellite technology can help them, in particularly also looking at their own fields and in-field variability. So they can, with the satellite, see at which location maybe more water is needed, maybe more fertilizer might be needed, where the shortcomings are. And sometimes these patterns are persistent over the season, and even in the next year, you get certain areas where soil is simply not that fertile compared to other areas. So it's very fascinating for farmers to actually make that connection to remote sensing technology, and I think that is really fascinating, and I think particularly younger farmers and those farmers who are open to new technologies will very much potentially adopt those. I think Tamme is working in a similar field. Maybe he wants to add something.
Yes, you've been mowing a lot of grass for me. It's yes. I started my career working in satellite data, and I've seen it growing over the past decades, and it is still continuing to develop. And satellite data is definitely a great tool. The thing that we recently introduced is a smartphone app to actually take these satellite data also into the field. So not only from your office, from your desk, but we give farmers the opportunity to walk into their fields, walk into the satellite image, so to say, or the analyzed satellite image, and to, for instance, if there was an indication of a bad spot on the satellite data based on your vegetation indexes, indeed, you can walk towards it and you can identify the causes of the crop staying behind. Which can be many different, and that is something from space we can hardly see. So we see there is something wrong on the part of the field, but what's wrong? So we advise farmers take it on your smartphone, walk there, take a sample of the soil or a sample of the leaves, maybe even take a picture with the geocoding attached, and then you can go home for further analysis, or you can show it to an advisor for further analysis. And I must admit that I've rediscovered the value of these smartphone apps or mobile phone apps. We used to do a lot in the past with all kinds of PDAs and whatever. But I think Juan mentioned that before. The smartphone is in everybody's pocket. So it's in your pocket. You have it with you, and if you have apps on that, it will help you a lot. And it helps farmers not only in the morning or in the evening when they are at home in their office, but also during the day while they are in the fields, getting the information that's really needed.
Yeah, maybe just to add one additional point to what Tamme just said, what is even more interesting is that you can use the smartphone, but then you have also these new opportunities to link low-cost sensors to the smartphone, so they are directly connected, like, for example, soil moisture. So I do remember quite a time ago, I was talking to an African farmer in Kenya, and he told me, this piece of land, it's just not fertile at all because he forgot to irrigate. And in that time, it was I think 10 years ago, we discussed this option of a low-cost soil moisture sensor. And I think this is coming. So also temperature sensors give some warning about heat stress, but also the lack of the lack of irrigation at certain locations. So I think that this is really exciting also with respect to the Internet of Things, where all these sensors are being connected and brought together.
Yeah, and it's strange. I mean, whenever I hear about satellite data in relation to farmers, I think, based on conversations I've had with a lot of farmers I do research with, I still think about CAP regulations and how that satellite data is used also to tell them off when they're not following the agro-environmental schemes that they're a part of, or some of the basic environmental regulations they're asked to follow. And that makes me think also about, Steffen, what you said about some farmers being reluctant to share their data. I'm wondering how most farmers react to this idea of being able to see their own farm, from a satellite, or being able to get sensor data on their own farm and someone else being able to access that, because they must know someone else is able to access that if they themselves have access to that tool, right? Is there some resistance in this space where they immediately tie sensors to regulation and surveillance to a certain extent?
Yeah, I think... Don't know if somebody else wants to answer. I think
Juan Carlos was going to step in, but after you.
Yes, please. No, Juan Carlos, please.
No, I just had the impression that it's really dependent on where you are, right? So when we were in Mexico with the first project, there were this clear, so we were, our acting partner was CIMIT on the ground, and they had direct arrangements with the farmers that they were working with, so they could somehow use the data that they were producing and the location they were doing it and so on. Since the tool is a mass, so it's a communication way to mass transmit all these technologies. One of the first things we were thinking is of course how will the data from the farmers be occupied and by whom and so on. So we had to think of ways to clarify this at the beginning, and we also thought for reasons of security, for example, not to share exact locations of the farmers if other farmers could see them, but share, for example, averages of certain locations and how much for that location some potential could be achieved. And I have the impression that here in the European Union, this is more of this regulatory power. But I think maybe Steffen or Tamme might want to comment on that.
Yeah, maybe one aspect, coming back to this challenging question you asked, how does the farmer perceive this surveillance of the Commission as it has been done traditionally? I mean, there has been changes. So previously, there were only tests and controls being done on, I think, 5% by the farm. So for a farmer, it was still maybe possible to try to cheat a little bit, to declare a different crop. This is no longer possible now, because nowadays with the new technology and with Sentinel-2, everything is known. You can very well find those places where it's very unlikely that a farmer has declared, or it's not possible that maybe a farmer has declared a certain field, and these areas will then be quite quickly investigated. So this technology has changed so much that and everything is anyway transparent. So maybe conveying a more positive message to the farmer and say, you can actually enhance what is being anyway observed by satellite. For example, linear features are going to be increasingly observed, such as hedges and hedgerows. Those things you can detect from satellite to some degree now, especially with very high resolution. But you still need sometimes the contextual information from the farmer, and then maybe adding some element of the potential to give farmers a voice in self-reporting and saying, here is a beehive. A beehive is very hard to pick up from remote sensing, but to give the farmers the option to additionally add some contextual information to the remote sensing information could flip this whole idea of surveillance to, I can contribute myself and I can enrich the data being collected anyway. So this is what some thoughts on that.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I think the new CAP is also trying to move away from compliance and is more focusing on performance. And that has to do with the things we discussed before. But it also means that the controls are changing. If you want to aim for performance, it doesn't make sense to just to take a stick and hit the farmer continuously with you did something wrong or you didn't comply with the rules. What we now see as being implemented in the new CAP is what they call the area monitoring system. So these satellite data are not used purely for control. They are used to monitor the agriculture and also agricultural activity, to advise farmers whether they are on track with their obligations and how their performance is going ongoing. So that comes very close to what you are suggesting, Steffen, is that basically the paying agencies who are responsible for executing these CAP regulations are no longer just controlling it, but they also are giving information back to the farmer about their performance, on which the farmer can act or not. But in the end, if he does not respond, he might get penalized for not doing things or whatever. But there will be, so in the old days it was the claim of the farmer and then the control. But now the idea is that there will be a continuously dialogue between the paying agency, hence the commission, and the farmer. And indeed, satellite data is much more used for those kind of tools. The commission also wants to implement this FAST, the farm sustainability tool, which is indeed like a scenario tool where farmers can understand how different activities impact on climate, environment, etc.
I think because we touched upon all these data and surveillance questions, many of our audience members who aren't so familiar with the agri-tech sector will be immediately thinking about the GAFAM, the big social media and internet companies who are getting caught up in all these large data controversies. And many of the GAFAM are also getting interested in agri-tech and in land in general, indeed. So I was wondering whether maybe not just talking about Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and so forth, you could give us a sense of who are the next big business actors who are going to get involved in the future technologies of the farming sector, and whether we should keep our eyes open on some of those market dynamics and penetration dynamics, and maybe some of the hopes attached or some of the fears. Steffen, do you want to get us started?
I can try. I mean, there are many ways and paths this can go, and indeed there is a certain probability and maybe at the same time a risk, as you have mentioned, that the biggies, Google, Amazon and so forth, are going to get into that space. But what would be to some degree wished for. And what could also happen is that, the farmers organize themselves more from a bottom-up and grassroots perspective, and they start understanding that their data is actually valuable, and they don't necessarily always automatically give all their data freely out to the big companies, or they give it available and make it available to everybody, which then gives other small, medium enterprises also the opportunity to provide specific niche services for farmers. So I think the key is how actually they will deal with the data. Maybe I should stop here because there is somebody's ringing at the door. Sorry about that. Maybe pass on to somebody else.
Tamme, would you like to comment? And then Juan.
Yeah, I think technology is extremely important, and the data feeding this technology or coming from the technology is also therefore extremely important. But data is useless unless you can analyze it or make diagnostics with it and put it into action, as has been mentioned. So companies like in the digital realm, like the big ones, are definitely needed to deal with all these data and make common good sense out of it. I'm not so cynical that they will take over the agricultural market, but what we see already, I think this week Microsoft announced that they were going to work together with Bayer on certain aspects. Well, then you see that the big tech and the big ag companies are joining together, and they can definitely develop a lot of power in these joint ventures. And I think Bosch and BASF are doing these kind of things as well. So there's a lot of joint ventures where technology and agricultural companies are working together, and that will definitely be an important way forward for the future. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think if we don't act, they can indeed be very important players in the near future. I fully support what Steffen was mentioning, is that I think farmers should better realize the value of the data they have and the data production that they do instead of their agricultural production, and somehow organize themselves to make sure that they're not the victims of these big companies, but they can rather be collaborators of these big companies. They provide the data. They also have to work on the field, but these big companies can help them in achieving that in a better way. So there needs to be some kind of balance. But at this moment, it looks like the big tech companies have a lot of advantages. And as I say, if we don't act on that, they may take over the agricultural realm. And they have no understanding of agriculture. So that would be a horrible thing.
Yeah, maybe if you allow me, or maybe Juan wants to add something first. I have also something to add, but...
Go ahead, Steffen.
Maybe if you have something to say, I'll just try to recollect.
No, I mean it's just I completely agree with this, and I think we, like, from the perspective of our institute, like a non-governmental research-oriented, policy-oriented institute, we have to be very careful on how we develop this kind of technology, so we involve the farmers, especially the small farmers in more distant places, like for the projects that we work in Mexico, say, for example, as to make them aware of this value. So they will progressively see that the use of these tools is more and more prevalent. So the more aware that they become of the value of the data, then that also is sort of remains with us to do a bit of the groundwork too. So, and we are quite aware of this, at least in our project. So I think it's important to say it.
Carlos, just a follow-up question. What is the value of this data, simply put, and how do you convey that to a farmer?
Well, so I think, I mean, for us, for a perspective of a crop, let's say of a research institution that develop crop models, and the value of the in situ data is quite important because it allows us to fine-tune models that do better predictions. And so if you think of it from a commercial point of view, you have a better prediction, you know what you could offer, right? And where is needed too, which is not a bad thing if you are not monopolizing that, and you're actually providing a service for people that need it. So I'm not against market either. So I'm just trying to say that's a value of that. And so how do we make aware of the farmers of that is, saying that transparently in the app. So exactly this. If people knows that this could be your management practice or your yield or so on, this can be used to provide you a service that it will cost you something, but at the same time is a service or a product or so, right? So as long as you're aware of this, as long as you are clear on that, and you can organize with the rest of farmers or so on, or the local organization, local government, so how to manage that, that should be that. So transparency to me again is the same topic, and back and forth, no, for towards the farmers and back.
And maybe if you allow me to, Alexandra, just to add one aspect, and I think this is the aspect around open data. And as we have seen now, and what has been happening with the Googles and the Amazons and the Facebooks, very, very little data which Google owns is actually shared with the public. Also Twitter data, you can just get access to 1% or something. It's really peanuts what they really share. And you've seen it even through the pandemic. We all were desperate to understand better mobility data, for example. What did Google? They did something good. They made it public, but only in PDF format on a subnational level. And we don't want something similar to happen in the ag sector, that only the biggies are getting access to all their data, controlling it. So it's really important also to make funders aware that there is really value in just funding in situ data and open data. And that's started to happen now. The first time the European Commission gave some money as part of this GeoGlam initiative to make crop type data and location data freely open. And there should be more of those initiatives where maybe even the farmer gets even paid for making data free and open, and that here we already intervene early, that in 10 years we find ourselves that there is no public data on, or very little or not more than now, data on agriculture, because only then really, and this comes back to the modeling we do at IIASA, we can make meaningful predictions in the future and understand better previous developments if we really get access to that really extremely valuable and useful farm level management data. And I think the society at large is not really fully aware of the importance and value of that in situ data, which also Juan has mentioned.
Maybe one other important aspect of data, what we have in the Netherlands are sowing machines that sow on the GPS location at 2 centimeter accuracy the seeds. And then later on, we have the weeders that are removing the weeds. If they don't have the right information about where the seeds are planted, they will remove the plants rather than the weeds. So you see, there's also a lot of dependency coming towards the data quality, but the data itself. Without these data, there are a lot of practices that are no longer feasible.
Thank you guys so much. I mean, I think I'm tempted to leave it at that and to close. And so instead of doing that in the most abrupt way, I'm just gonna open the floor in case you guys want to note anything else that's left, something that pops to your mind and you're just like, we can't finish if we don't mention this.
We are good.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yes, you created some very interesting conversation we had, we wouldn't have otherwise had, which is great. Good to touch base with
Cool,
Tamme.
yeah.
Thanks again, Tamme, for jumping in, because
no problem.
We needed exactly your expertise that was missing. So it's good we closed that gap. Yeah.
I hope I could contribute. It was nice. It would definitely be interesting to talk again. And
sure.
maybe we find reasons to collaborate somehow.
Our show is a podcast from Tascape Media, hosted by Alexandra George-Pico, who's also an assistant producer, and Theodore Simmons, who produces and edits the series. The production assistant is me, Beatrix Keeler. Alistair Simmons is our executive producer. Our thanks to all who have been involved in making the show possible.